The crack of a pistol. That's how it started. One shot echoing across the parched, dusty streets of Gila Bend, Arizona territory. The year was 1877, and Hannah Lockhart just dropped to her knees in the dirt. Her fingers were trembling, clutching a piece of paper. A contract that had just sealed her fate. Her father's body wasn't even cold in the ground. He'd been a good man, but a proud one. Too proud to tell her how bad things had gotten. The creditors didn't wait. They never do. And now, at 20 years old, Hannah found herself as property. A piece of collateral. Something to be bartered away to the highest bidder to cover her daddy's debts. "Get up, girl." The voice was like gravel in a dry creek bed. Jeremiah Blackwell. The town's lone shark, a man who owned half of Gila Bend and had a mortgage on the other half. And now, he owned her. His yellowed teeth flashed under a stained mustache as he yanked her to her feet. The crowd that had gathered just watched. They always just watched. "You'll fetch a fine price at Madame Recitas's," he growled, waving the contract in her face. "Your father's debts will finally be worth something to me." Hannah's stomach turned to ice. Madame Recitas. She knew that name. Every woman in the territory knew that name. It wasn't a finishing school. She struggled against his grip, her long copper hair falling loose from its pins. "Please, Mr. Blackwell," she pleaded. "There must be another way. The farm. The farm." Blackwell let out a laugh that sounded like a boot crushing dry leaves. "The farm, that worthless patch of dirt, wouldn't cover half of what your daddy owed me." His eyes, cold and assessing, raked over her. "No, you're the only thing of value he left behind." He was going to sell her. Right here, in the street. The crowd that had gathered in the street parted. A tall figure on horseback was approaching. The afternoon sun silhouetted him, casting his features in shadow beneath the wide brim of his hat. He wasn't from Gila Bend, Hannah would have remembered. He dismounted in one fluid motion. Trail dust clung to his clothes. He had a weathered face that spoke of years under an open sky. His voice was deep, with an accent that hinted at Texas. "What's happening here?" Blackwell spat in the dust near the stranger's boots. "Nothing that concerns you, stranger. Just collecting on a debt." The cowboy's eyes, blue as a summer sky, flicked from Hannah's tear-streaked face to the contract in Blackwell's hand. Collecting a debt. With a woman. That's not how civilized folks conduct business. Blackwell bristled, waving the paper like a flag. "The law is on my side. Her father signed this before he died. She's mine. Mine to sell to cover what he owed." The stranger stepped closer. Hannah noticed the way his hand hovered, almost casually, near the holster at his hip. "How much?" The question was quiet, but it cut through the murmuring of the crowd. Blackwell sneered. "What's it to you?" The cowboy didn't blink. "How much is the debt?" $250, plus interest." Blackwell's smile was all greed. Without hesitation, the stranger reached into his vest. He pulled out a worn leather pouch. $300. That should cover the interest, too." A hush fell over the street. $300. That was a fortune. It was more than a man might see in a year. Hannah stared at the stranger, her mind reeling. Why? Why would anyone pay such a sum for someone they'd never even met? Blackwell's eyes narrowed, suspicion warring with greed. Greed won. It always did with Blackwell. He snatched the pouch from the stranger's hand. With practiced, grimy fingers, he counted the money. A slow, wolfish grin spread across his face. "Well, well, it seems it's your lucky day, girl." He thrust the contract toward the cowboy. "She's yours." The stranger took the paper. He studied it for a long moment. Then he looked directly at Hannah. The intensity of his gaze made her heart stop. It wasn't the look Blackwell had given her. It wasn't assessing. It was something else. With slow, deliberate movements, he tore the contract in half, then in quarters. He let the pieces flutter to the dirt. "No," he said quietly, his voice carrying in the sudden dead silence. "She's her own woman now." Blackwell's face went from smug to purple in a heartbeat. "You can't just... You bought her. You can't." "I believe I just did." The stranger's hand was no longer hovering. It was resting openly on the grip of his revolver. "The debt is paid. Our business is concluded." Blackwell looked from the torn contract in the dust to the determined stance of the stranger. He looked at the hand on the gun. He looked at the quiet, unmoving crowd. He spat in the dust again. "Fool and his money," he muttered. He shoved his way through the crowd and was gone. Hannah stood frozen. She didn't know whether to run, to cry, or to thank this man. Her legs felt like water. "Why?" she finally managed to whisper. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" The cowboy adjusted his hat. A smile touched the corners of his mouth, transforming his stern features. "Name's Rusty Weaver, and I don't make a habit of standing by when someone's being treated unjustly." He extended his hand. It was calloused, but his grip was surprisingly gentle when she placed her trembling hand in his. "Seems like you could use a friend in Gila Bend, miss." "Hannah Lockhart. And I believe I owe you more than friendship, Mr. Weaver. I owe you my freedom." "Let's start with a meal and conversation," he suggested, gesturing toward the Prairie Rose Diner. "You can tell me about your situation, and perhaps we can figure out what comes next." As they walked side by side, Hannah felt the weight of her circumstances, but for the first time. She also felt a faint, tiny stirring of hope. But this was Gila Bend, and she knew men like Blackwell. This was far from over. The Prairie Rose Diner was nearly empty. The lunch rush was long gone. A middle-aged woman with flour-dusted hands emerged from the kitchen, her face a mask of concern. "Hannah Lockhart, I heard the commotion outside. Child, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Jenkins, thanks to Mr. Weaver here." Hannah gestured to the cowboy. Mrs. Jenkins, a woman who had known Hannah since she was born, sized up Rusty with a practiced, sharp eye. "Well, sir, any friend of Hannah's is welcome here. Take a seat, both of you. It's on the house today." Rusty removed his hat. "That's mighty kind, ma'am, but unnecessary. I can pay." "Nonsense." Mrs. Jenkins waved away his protest. "This town owes Hannah for how she's been treated since her daddy passed. I'll bring you both some stew and cornbread." When she disappeared back into the kitchen, Hannah smoothed her wrinkled skirt, suddenly aware of how disheveled she looked. "Mrs. Jenkins and her husband were friends of my parents. They've been kind." "Seems like you have some allies in town," Rusty observed, his eyes taking in the small, clean diner. Hannah sighed, the small flicker of hope already fading. "Not enough to matter against Blackwell. He's owned half the businesses in Gila Bend since the silver mine started producing." She paused, the grief still fresh. "My father, he borrowed money to expand our farm. When the drought came, he couldn't repay. Then the fever took him, 2 weeks ago." "I'm sorry for your loss," Rusty said, his voice quiet. "He was a good man," Hannah whispered, blinking back tears. Too proud to tell me how bad things had gotten. I only found that contract after he died." Mrs. Jenkins returned with 2 steaming bowls. "Eat up now. You both look like you need it." As they ate, Hannah studied her unlikely savior. He was older than her, maybe 30. Sun-weathered skin, lean, muscular. His beard was neatly trimmed, his clothes worn but clean. But it was his eyes that held her. They seemed to take in everything, while revealing almost nothing. What brings you to Gila Bend, Mr. Weaver? Rusty, please, he corrected. I'm delivering horses to the army outpost at Fort Yuma. Stopped here for supplies. You're a horse trader? Among other things, I have a small ranch near Tombstone. Raise and train horses. He broke off a piece of cornbread. What about you? You have family you can stay with. Hannah shook her head. No, my mother passed when I was 15. No siblings. The farm was all I had left. And I expect Blackwell will take that too. Rusty's brow furrowed. The contract was for you, not the land. The land was mortgaged separately. Father couldn't keep up with the payments. She pushed her half-eaten stew away, her appetite gone. I don't know what I'll do. I have no money, no home. Rusty was silent for a moment, considering. I need to finish my business with the army. It'll take a week, maybe more. He hesitated, as if weighing his words. I could use help with the horses. It's not easy work, but it pays. Hannah stared at him. You're offering me a job? For now, it would give you time to figure out your next steps. Suspicion crept back in. Her father had warned her. Men didn't just help women without expecting something in return. Why would you do that? You've already spent a small fortune on me. Rusty met her gaze directly. There was no pity in his eyes, just understanding. I know what it's like to have nothing and nowhere to go. Someone gave me a chance once. I'm just passing it along. Something in his tone told her he was being truthful. Still, I appreciate the offer, but I don't know you, Mr. Rusty. He nodded, respecting her reservation. Fair enough. The offer stands if you change your mind. I'm staying at the livery stable with my horses until morning. Before Hannah could respond, the diner's door swung open with a bang. It was Blackwell. And this time, he wasn't alone. He was flanked by two burly men, the kind of men who did his dirty work. There she is, Blackwell sneered, his eyes landing on Hannah. Thought you'd celebrate your good fortune, did you, Miss Lockhart? Rusty rose slowly to his feet, placing himself between Hannah and the door. We've concluded our business, Blackwell. Not quite. Blackwell stepped closer, his two goons fanning out. You paid for the contract, that's true. He produced another document from his coat. But the farm is still mine, signed and notarized this morning. Sheriff Davis witnessed it himself. Hannah felt the room spin, her entire life erased in a single day. Blackwell's smile was a cruel slash. And there's the matter of her father's personal effects at the homestead. Hannah's heart sank. Her father's pocket watch, her mother's jewelry, the few precious heirlooms they had. You have no right to those things, she protested. I have every right, Blackwell countered. Everything on that property belongs to me now, including whatever you left there. Rusty's voice remained even, but Hannah saw his stance shift. She has until sundown to collect her personal items, he stated. It wasn't a request, it was a declaration. Blackwell's smile faded. He looked at Rusty, then at his men. She can have 1 hour, under supervision. I'll accompany her, Rusty said. As you wish. Blackwell gestured to his men. But my boys will be coming too. Can't have anyone claiming items that, rightfully, belong to me now. He left. The diner felt colder. Hannah sagged back into her chair. I'm sorry you've been dragged into my troubles. Rusty sat down. We should go now, before he changes his mind. There's no need for you to come. You've done enough. I doubt Blackwell's men will be gentlemen escorts, Rusty said, his expression softening. Besides, you might need help carrying your things. Outside, Rusty untied his horse, a magnificent buckskin stallion. This is Thunder. He can carry both of us to your farm. Hannah hesitated, riding double with a man she just met. But nothing about this day had been proper. The farm's only 2 miles outside town. Rusty offered his hand. All the more reason not to walk in this heat. He helped her mount, then swung up behind her. Hannah felt the unfamiliar warmth of his chest against her back, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins. Survival, she thought, had suddenly become more important than decorum. They rode toward the farmhouse, the home she had been born in. And she knew, deep in her gut, this wasn't just about collecting heirlooms. Blackwell wanted to make her watch. He wanted to rub her face in what she had lost. And she had a terrible feeling this was still just the beginning. The farmhouse looked empty. The white paint was peeling, the garden withered from neglect during her father's illness. But it was still home. Blackwell and his men were already there. They'd ridden ahead. From the sounds of it, they were already inside, ransacking the place. Rusty helped Hannah dismount, his hand lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. A silent gesture of support. "Take only what matters most," he advised quietly. "We won't have long." Inside was chaos. Drawers had been emptied, furniture overturned. Blackwell was in her father's study, rifling through the desk. "Ah, there you are," he said without looking up. "1 hour, Miss Lockhart. The clock is ticking." Hannah hurried to her bedroom, Rusty following close behind. She pulled a carpet bag from beneath her bed and began filling it with essentials. Clothes, a hairbrush, a small portrait of her parents. Her fingers trembled. "There's a loose floorboard," she whispered to Rusty, "under the rug. Could you?" He understood immediately. He pulled back the worn carpet. Inside was a small wooden box, her mother's wedding ring, a locket, and a few gold coins. "Father must have saved these," Hannah said, her voice thick. "I had no idea." "Smart man," Rusty commented, handing her the box. "This might give you a fresh start somewhere." She tucked it into her bag and reached beneath her pillow for a well-worn book of poetry, her mother's favorite. Just then, she heard Blackwell's heavy footsteps. "Finding anything valuable, Miss Lockhart?" he asked from the doorway. His gaze was calculating, moving from her to Rusty. "Just some clothes and mementos," she answered, clutching the bag. Blackwell stepped closer. "I'll need to inspect that before you leave." "That wasn't part of our agreement," Rusty said, moving subtly between them. "My property, my rules," Blackwell insisted. Hannah saw Rusty's jaw tighten. "The lady's undergarments aren't your concern," he said evenly. "Unless you want the whole town to know you're the type of man who paws through a woman's personal items." A tense, heavy silence stretched between the men. Finally, Blackwell relented with a dismissive wave. "Fine, but nothing else leaves this house." After he stalked away, Hannah exhaled, shaky. "There's a wooden chest in the barn. My father's tools. They were my grandfather's. I'd like to take those if possible." Rusty nodded. "I'll create a distraction. When Blackwell's men are occupied, slip out to the barn." "What kind of distraction?" A hint of mischief crossed Rusty's face. "The kind that works." He left the room. Moments later, Hannah heard a commotion from the front of the house, Rusty's voice, loud and accusing. "This here ledger wasn't part of the property deed, Blackwell. Looks like you're stealing from the dead." Blackwell's angry response was immediate. Hannah heard multiple sets of footsteps moving toward the argument. This was her chance. She slipped out the back door and ran to the barn. The familiar smell of hay and leather greeted her. The chest was right where it had always been, tucked beneath a workbench. She opened it quickly, selecting the most valuable and portable items. A finely crafted hammer, her grandfather's whittling knife, a small leather pouch of specialized carpentry tools. As she was closing the chest, a noise behind her made her freeze. One of Blackwell's men stood in the doorway. A grin split his face, a grin that made her skin crawl. "Found you. Boss said you might try something like this." Hannah clutched the tools. "These belonged to my grandfather, and now they belong to Mr. Blackwell." He advanced on her, hand outstretched. "Hand 'em over, girl." She backed away, trapped. "Please, they have no value to anyone but me." "That ain't for you to decide." He lunged, grabbing her arm. Hannah cried out, dropping some of the tools as she struggled. His fingers dug painfully into her flesh. Just as he raised his other hand, the barn door burst open wider. Rusty stood silhouetted against the afternoon light. His expression was thunderous. "Take your hands off her." The man turned, not releasing Hannah. "This ain't your business, cowboy. She's stealing." "She's collecting family heirlooms that aren't part of the property," Rusty corrected, stepping into the barn. His hand was on his gun. "Now, let her go." The man hesitated. He looked at Rusty's cold eyes, at the gun. He shoved Hannah roughly against the wall. "Fine, have the damn tools. But Blackwell won't forget this." He stomped away. Hannah rubbed her bruised arm. "Thank you. Again. We should go. Now." Rusty helped her gather the fallen tools. They hurried back to Thunder. Rusty secured her bag and the tools, then helped her mount. Just as he was swinging up behind her, Blackwell emerged from the house, his face contorted with rage. "This isn't over, Weaver," he shouted as they rode away. "Nobody crosses me in my town." Hannah felt Rusty's arms tighten around her as he urged Thunder into a gallop. They didn't slow until the farm was a speck in the distance. "Are you all right?" Rusty asked, his breath warm against her ear. Hannah just nodded, not trusting her voice. They rode in silence until the outskirts of Gila Bend came into view. "I've been thinking," Rusty said finally. "Blackwell seems the vengeful type. It might not be safe for you to stay in town tonight." Hannah knew he was right. "I could ask Mrs. Jenkins if I could sleep in her storeroom." "Or," Rusty suggested carefully, "you could reconsider my job offer. We could leave for Fort Yuma. Tonight, put some distance between you and Blackwell." Hannah twisted to look at him. "Tonight, but your supplies." "I have enough for the journey. We can get the rest at the fort." She weighed her options. Stay in a town where a powerful man now had a vendetta against her, or leave with this stranger, a man who had already twice proven himself honorable. It wasn't much of a choice. "If I accept your offer," she said slowly, "I want to be clear. It's employment only." Rusty's expression remained serious. "Of course, you'll have your own tent. I'll pay you fair wages, and when we reach Fort Yuma, you can decide whether to continue on or make your own way." They reached the livery stable. Rusty's other horses, 11 magnificent animals, were corralled at the back. "Give me a few minutes to settle up," Rusty said as he helped her dismount. While he was gone, Hannah took stock. In one day she'd lost her home, narrowly escaped being sold to a brothel, and agreed to travel across the territory with a man she barely knew. Yet, she felt a strange sense of liberation. For the first time, no one was dictating her path. Rusty returned. "We're all set. Think you can ride on your own?" "I've been riding since I was a child." "Good." He gestured to a gentle-looking mare. "This is Willow. She's steady, perfect for a long journey." As they prepared to depart, Hannah cast one last glance at Gila Bend. 20 years of memories. She felt no regret as they rode away, the horses' hooves kicking up dust, erasing her footprints from the only home she had ever known. The night cloaked them in darkness. They rode east, guided by the stars and Rusty's unerring sense of direction. Hannah had never seen a sky so big. "How far to Fort Yuma?" she asked when they paused to water the horses. 3 days, if we keep a good pace, Rusty replied. He offered her a strip of jerky. You holding up all right? I'm fine. She accepted the food. It's exhilarating. Rusty smiled, a real smile that softened his weathered features. Freedom has a way of lifting the spirit. They made camp in a sheltered arroyo. Rusty was efficient. He set up 2 small tents, built a modest fire, and tended to the horses. As they sat before the crackling flames, Hannah studied him. You never explained, she said finally, why you stepped in today. Most men would have walked away. Rusty was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. My sister, he said eventually. His voice was low. Ella. She was in a similar situation once. No one helped her. Hannah waited. Our parents died. I was 16. Ella was 14. We had a small homestead in Texas. Couldn't manage it. Took loans. His expression darkened. The banker who held our notes, he was a lot like Blackwell. When we couldn't pay, he took an interest in other forms of payment. Hannah's heart constricted. Your sister? She refused him. We both did. Rusty's hand moved unconsciously to a faint scar on his temple. I got this from my trouble. Ella. She ran away that night. I searched for months. Never found her. I'm so sorry, Rusty. He met her gaze across the fire. The flames reflected in his eyes. When I saw you today, in the street, I saw Ella. I couldn't walk away. Not again. The raw honesty in his voice. In that moment, Hannah knew. She could trust this man, not because he saved her, but because he understood what it was to lose. Thank you, she whispered, for telling me, and for being there today. They sat in silence. The only sounds were the fire and the distant call of a coyote. You should get some rest, Rusty said, noticing her fatigue. We'll start early. Hannah retreated to her small tent. As she settled onto the bedroll, she realized this was the first night of her adult life she had slept away from the farmhouse. Sleep came, but her dreams were troubled. Blackwell's sneering face, her father's grave, and endless, empty desert roads. She woke before dawn. Rusty was already awake, brewing coffee. He handed her a tin cup. I thought we'd reach Echo Canyon by nightfall, he said. Reliable water source there. I've never been this far east. The territory opens up past the canyon, good grazing land. He hesitated. My ranch is about a week's ride beyond Fort Yuma. Small place, but the horses do well there. He was offering more of himself, building trust. How long have you had it? 5 years. Worked cattle drives to save up. It's not much, but it's mine. The quiet pride in his voice was unmistakable. What about you? Did you ever want something beyond the farm? Hannah thought about it as they broke camp. I used to dream of San Francisco. My mother had a cousin there. She wrote letters about the ocean. She smiled wistfully. But after Mother died, Father needed me. Dreams have a way of changing, Rusty agreed, helping her mount Willow. But sometimes they find new paths. They rode east. The sun climbed higher. Hannah discovered Rusty was a patient teacher. He showed her how to manage the string of horses, how to read the land. By midday, she felt a rhythm. You're a natural with horses, he observed during a rest. We had a few on the farm, she said, flushing at the compliment. Nothing like these. They're magnificent. Army pays top dollar for quality mounts. These will go to the cavalry at Fort Yuma. By the time they made camp that evening in Echo Canyon, Hannah realized she had laughed more in one day than she had in the past year. Rusty disappeared, returning with 2 desert rabbits. He roasted them over the fire. This is a feast, Hannah said, eating appreciatively. Wait until we reach the fort. You'll have a proper meal there. Will you be staying long? 2 days, at most. Conclude my business. Resupply. He studied her across the fire. And you? Have you given thought to what you'll do after? I have some money now, she said, thinking of the gold coins. Perhaps enough to start somewhere new. San Francisco. Perhaps, though it seems a distant dream now. Rusty was quiet. My offer of work isn't limited to this journey. The ranch could use an extra hand, especially someone good with horses. Hannah looked up, surprised. You'd offer me employment at your ranch? You barely know me. I'm a good judge of character, he replied simply. And finding reliable help isn't easy. The prospect was intimidating. A remote ranch, alone with him. But in the short time she'd known him, he'd shown her nothing but respect. I'll consider it, she said. Thank you. As night deepened, Hannah found herself studying his profile in the firelight. The strong line of his jaw, the crow's feet that suggested he smiled more than she'd seen. There was a steadiness to him, an attraction she tried to push away. The next morning, they made good progress. But by mid-afternoon, Hannah saw dark clouds building on the western horizon. Storm coming, Rusty observed. We should find shelter. How far to the next camp? Too far. There's an abandoned line shack about 2 miles ahead, used by cowboys. It's not much, but it'll keep us dry. They urged the horses to a faster pace. They reached the dilapidated shack just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. It was a single room, stone fireplace, a roof that leaked in several places. But it was shelter. Rusty secured the horses in a lean-to, while Hannah gathered what dry wood she could find. By the time the storm hit in earnest, they had a small fire going. The rain hammered the roof. Wind howled through the cracks. Thunder crashed overhead, and Hannah jumped. Not fond of storms? Rusty asked. They always frightened me, she admitted. My mother used to say it was angels rearranging furniture. Rusty chuckled. My father said it was God bowling. The close confines of the shack created an intimacy neither had anticipated. Their knees brushed as they sat by the fire. Tell me about your ranch, Hannah said, seeking distraction from the storm and from her growing awareness of him. Rusty's expression softened. It's in a valley. Creek runs through it. Good water, good grass. The house isn't much, but I've been adding to it. He looked vulnerable. It gets lonely sometimes. Hannah understood. A solitary life, however independent, had its own burdens. You ever regret leaving Texas? Rusty was quiet for a long time. I left because there was nothing to stay for. After Ella disappeared, after the bank took our land, there was just anger. That's no way to live. And now I have something that's mine, something I built. He met her gaze. That matters. Yes, Hannah said, understanding completely. It does. The storm began to abate. You should get some rest, Rusty said, noticing her fatigue. I'll keep watch. Hannah settled onto her bedroll. The last thing she remembered was the comforting sight of Rusty by the fire, his strong profile, his watchful gaze. She woke sometime in the night. The fire was embers. Rusty was asleep on his bedroll across the room. She watched the rise and fall of his chest. He looked vulnerable. The hardness was gone from his features. Years seemed shed from his face. A peculiar ache formed in her chest. A longing she wasn't ready to examine. She turned away, pulled her blanket tighter, and forced herself back to sleep. Morning came and they set out. By late afternoon, they spotted the flags of Fort Yuma in the distance. We'll be there before sundown, Rusty said. You'll have a real bed tonight. Hannah felt reluctant. The trail had created a separate world, her and Rusty. Returning to society meant confronting decisions. What happens when we reach the fort? I'll meet with the quartermaster. The transaction shouldn't take long. Then, we can resupply and decide our next move. Our next move. I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with the horses, she said carefully. Rusty's mouth quirked in a half-smile. You're a natural. I meant what I said about work at the ranch, if that's a path you're considering. I am considering it, she admitted, though I don't want to impose. It's not charity, Hannah, he said firmly. I need the help. You need a fresh start. Seems like a fair arrangement to me. Fort Yuma was bustling. Soldiers, traders. It was loud. Rusty led their caravan to the livery stable. The ostler greeted him warmly. Weaver, back with more fine stock, I see. The man's eyes shifted curiously to Hannah. This is Miss Lockhart, Rusty said. She's helping me with this delivery. The ostler nodded. Quartermaster's expecting you tomorrow. I've got your usual room ready at the boarding house. We'll need 2 rooms, Rusty corrected. The ostler shook his head. Place is full up. Survey team. Lucky to have your room held. Army's been sending more men through. Something about Apache movements to the north. Rusty frowned. He turned to Hannah. I'll find other arrangements. You take the room. That's unnecessary, Hannah said quickly. I can find. Not many women at the fort, the ostler interjected. And those that are here are particular about who they take in. Hannah flushed. The implication was clear. A woman traveling alone with a man she wasn't married to. Rusty seemed to read her thoughts. You'll take the room, he said, in a tone that brooked no argument. I've slept under the stars plenty. The boarding house was run by a stern-faced woman, Mrs. Harding. She looked Hannah up and down with obvious disapproval. I run a respectable establishment, Mr. Weaver. Miss Lockhart is a respectable woman who has suffered recent hardships, Rusty replied evenly. She'll be taking my room. Mrs. Harding sniffed, but handed over the key. Dinner's at 6. No visitors in the rooms after 8. The room was small, but clean. After days on the trail, it seemed luxurious. I'll come by in the morning, Rusty said, lingering in the doorway. After I've met with the quartermaster. Get some rest. Get a proper meal. Thank you for everything. Get some rest, Hannah. He touched the brim of his hat, and he was gone. Hannah sat on the bed, alone. And the reality of her situation hit her. She was homeless, penniless, save for a few gold coins, and entirely dependent on a man she'd known less than a week. Yet, she wasn't afraid. After washing away the trail dust, Hannah went downstairs for dinner. The dining room was crowded. She felt all eyes on her as she entered. An unaccompanied woman. Mrs. Harding directed her to a small table in the corner. She was nearly finished when a shadow fell across her table. A uniformed officer. Captain's bars on his shoulders. Miss Lockhart, isn't it? His tone was polite, but curious. I'm Captain James Sullivan, Fort Yuma's adjutant. Yes, sir. Mrs. Harding mentioned you arrived with Weaver. His eyes were assessing. May I inquire as to your relationship? For the fort's records, you understand. Hannah straightened her spine. Mr. Weaver is my employer. I'm assisting with his horse delivery. Sullivan's eyebrows rose. I see. And before that? I don't see how that's relevant to your records, Captain. A hint of a smile. Forgive my directness. Unaccompanied women are rare. The Army takes an interest in the welfare of civilians under its protection. I appreciate your concern. I'm quite well. Weaver's a good man, Sullivan nodded, apparently satisfied. Known him for years, always delivers excellent stock. He tipped his hat. "Good evening, Miss Lockhart." The interaction left her unsettled. A woman alone was suspect. She returned to her room. In the fading light, she saw a familiar figure crossing the parade ground. Rusty. She smiled, then quickly stepped back from the window, disconcerted by her own reaction. The next morning, she found Rusty waiting in the parlor. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in some time. And you?" "Comfortable enough. The ostler let me bunk in the tack room." He gestured to the dining room. "Breakfast?" Over biscuits and bacon, he laid it all out. "The transaction should take an hour. After that, we can resupply for the journey to the ranch, if you're still considering that option." "I am," Hannah said. "Though I want to be clear, I'd be working for wages, with my own accommodations." "Of course," Rusty said, not missing a beat. "There's a small cabin about 50 yards from the main house. Used to be for the previous owner's mother-in-law. It's basic, but sound. You'd have your privacy." He hesitated. "The position would include meals and a fair monthly wage. Duties? Helping with the horses, the garden, whatever needs doing." It sounded perfect. "And if, after a time, I wish to move on?" Rusty's direct gaze held no guile. "Then I'd wish you well and pay you what you've earned. You're not signing away your freedom, Hannah. This isn't another contract to bind you." The reference to Gila Bend, to Blackwell. It was all she needed to hear. "Then I accept your offer, Mr. Weaver." A rare, full smile spread across his face. "I think we're past Mr. Weaver at this point, don't you?" "I suppose we are." "Rusty." Their breakfast was interrupted by Captain Sullivan. "Weaver, the quartermaster is ready for you." He then turned to Hannah. "Miss Lockhart, perhaps you'd enjoy a tour of the fort while Mr. Weaver conducts his business. My wife would be delighted to accompany you." Hannah glanced at Rusty. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. "That's very kind, Captain. Thank you." Mrs. Sullivan was a lively woman in her 30s, clearly starved for female companionship. As they walked, she provided a running commentary on fort life, mixed with gentle questions. It must have been dreadful, she sympathized, after Hannah gave her a carefully edited version of events. "And now you're to work at Mr. Weaver's ranch. That's quite unusual." "It's a business arrangement," Hannah said firmly. "Mr. Weaver has been nothing but respectful." "Oh, I'm sure," Mrs. Sullivan said, with a knowing smile. "Rusty Weaver has quite a reputation for integrity. The officers trust him implicitly." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Between us, there have been several ladies at the fort who have set their caps for him, but he's never shown interest." She paused, as if for dramatic effect. "Some say he's still pining for someone he lost, tragically. He never talks about it." Hannah felt a curious twinge. Ella. But this sounded like more. "His personal life is his own affair," Hannah said, keeping her voice neutral. "Of course, dear. I'm just making conversation." Mrs. Sullivan brightened. "Oh, we're having a small gathering this evening. A few officers, their wives. You must join us. Mr. Weaver is already invited, of course." "I'm not sure I'm properly attired." "Nonsense. I have a dress that would suit you perfectly. We're of a similar size." Hannah, unable to refuse, accepted. She found Rusty waiting in the boarding house lobby. His business was done. "Successful transaction?" "Very." The army was pleased. He seemed about to say more when Mrs. Sullivan bustled in. "Mr. Weaver, I've just been showing Miss Lockhart around, and she's agreed to join us this evening." A flicker of something crossed Rusty's features. "Resignation?" "Wouldn't miss it, ma'am," he said. After Mrs. Sullivan left, he turned to Hannah with a raised eyebrow. "A dinner party?" She was very insistent, Hannah flushed. The Sullivans are good people, Rusty conceded. Though, their gatherings tend to involve a fair amount of matchmaking. The captain seems determined to see every bachelor in the territory wed. The implication made Hannah's blush deepen. I know you didn't, Rusty said, his expression softening into amusement. And there's no harm in enjoying an evening of civilization before we head back to the trail. He hesitated. Though, if you're uncomfortable, I can make your excuses. No, Hannah said, surprising herself. I'll go. True to her word, Mrs. Sullivan sent over a dress, a modest but attractive gown of deep blue cotton. When Rusty called for her, he had clearly visited the fort's barber. His beard was trimmed, his hair cut. He looked different. You look, he started. He cleared his throat. That color suits you. Thank you, Hannah replied, pleased by his restraint. The Sullivans' quarters were filled with officers and their wives. Hannah noted the curious glances, but the introductions were made without undue emphasis. Dinner was lively. Army politics, news from the east. Then, Miss Lockhart is from Gila Bend, Mrs. Sullivan announced. Such a charming little town. Not so charming if you're on the wrong side of Jeremiah Blackwell, an older officer at the far end of the table commented. Man's got a stranglehold on half the businesses between there and Tucson. Hannah tensed. Her fingers tightened on her fork. Beneath the table, she felt a gentle pressure. Rusty's boot, just brushing hers. A silent message. I'm here. Politics are hardly suitable dinner conversation, Major, Mrs. Sullivan chided, her sharp eyes noting Hannah's discomfort. The conversation shifted. Hannah shot a grateful glance at her hostess. As the party moved to the parlor for music, Rusty maneuvered to her side. You all right? We can leave. I'm fine. It was just unexpected to hear his name. Blackwell's reach is long, Rusty acknowledged. But he has no power here. Later, Captain Sullivan approached them. When do you plan to depart, Weaver? Day after tomorrow. Need to resupply first. Sullivan nodded. Wise. There have been reports of Apache activity to the north. Nothing confirmed, but best to be cautious. Hannah felt a flicker of apprehension. Is travel unsafe? The main routes are secure, Sullivan assured her. And Weaver knows the territory. Still, I wouldn't recommend traveling alone these days. We'll take precautions, Rusty said firmly. Walking back to the boarding house under the stars, the silence was comfortable. At her door, Rusty hesitated. I'll be gathering supplies tomorrow. Is there anything specific you need for the journey? Perhaps some paper and a pencil, Hannah said. I'd like to keep a journal. I'll see to it. Sleep well, Hannah. She watched him walk away. In less than a week, this man had become the fixed point in her rapidly changing world. It was both comforting and unsettling. They set out from Fort Yuma 2 days later, their horses and pack mules loaded with supplies. This journey felt different. It wasn't an escape. It was a beginning. The first few days passed uneventfully. The familiar rhythm of travel, camp, and simple meals shared by firelight. Hannah found herself growing more comfortable. Their conversations ranged from practical matters to more personal. Did you always want to raise horses? She asked one evening. Not specifically, Rusty said, poking the fire. But I've always valued independence, working my own land, answering to no one. That was the dream. He glanced up. What about you? What would you have done? I enjoyed teaching the younger children at our church, she said. Perhaps a school teacher. You'd be good at that, Rusty said thoughtfully. You have patience and kindness. The simple compliment warmed her. On the fourth day, the weather changed. The sky turned a bruised, yellowish gray. "Storm's coming," Rusty said, his expression grim. "A bad one." "Another line shack?" "Not that I know of, but there's a settlement about 5 miles ahead. Copper Springs. Mostly miners. Not much, but they'll have a hotel of sorts." Copper Springs was rough, a cluster of buildings huddled on a single dusty street. The hotel was a 2-story wooden structure with a saloon occupying the ground floor. Rusty frowned. "Wait here." He returned a few minutes later, his expression grim. "It's not good." "What is it?" "One room. It's all they have." Hannah glanced at the darkening sky. Lightning flickered. "We don't have much choice, do we?" "I can sleep in the stable." "Don't be ridiculous. The storm looks terrible." Hannah squared her shoulders. "We're both adults. We can share a room without impropriety." Rusty studied her, then nodded. "I'll sleep on the floor." The room was small, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chair. The window rattled. Below, the saloon was getting loud as miners sought shelter. "I should check on the horses," Rusty said, awkwardly. After he left, Hannah sat on the edge of the bed. This was complicated. Rusty returned, shaking water from his hat. "Horses are fine." Just then, a drop of water splashed onto the floor between them. Hannah couldn't help it. She laughed. After a moment, Rusty joined her. The tension broke. "We should get some rest," he said. "You don't have to sleep on the floor," Hannah said. "It looks uncomfortable, and you're wet." "I've slept in worse." Still, she hesitated. "We could share the bed above the covers, just to sleep. It's practical." Rusty's expression was carefully neutral. "That wouldn't be proper." "Neither is my traveling alone with a man I'm not related to," Hannah pointed out. "Yet here we are." A hint of a smile. "You make a fair point." They arranged themselves awkwardly, fully clothed, on top of the thin coverlet. As much space between them as the narrow bed would allow. Hannah drifted to sleep, lulled by the rain and Rusty's even breathing. She woke sometime in the night. She was disoriented. And warm. Somehow in sleep, they had shifted. She was on her side, her back to him, and Rusty's arm was draped protectively across her waist. She knew she should move, maintain the proper distance. But the simple comfort, the feeling of being safe, after weeks of grief and upheaval. She remained still, listening to the storm subside, listening to the steady beat of Rusty's heart behind her. And in that moment, suspended between sleep and wakefulness, Hannah acknowledged the truth. She was developing feelings, deep feelings, for this quiet, honorable man who had saved her. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it brought a strange, quiet peace. Morning arrived with clearing skies and an awkward awakening. Rusty pulled his arm away as if he'd been burned, mumbling an apology as he rose from the bed. "No need to apologize," Hannah said, smoothing her rumpled clothes. "It was practical. Right." Rusty nodded, his expression unreadable. He grabbed his hat. "I'll check on the horses. Meet you downstairs for breakfast." Hannah sat on the edge of the bed. Practicality was only part of it. There had been comfort in his nearness. But she had to be careful. He had offered her employment, not courtship. Downstairs, the saloon was serving coffee and biscuits. Rusty was at a corner table, back to the wall, always vigilant. He rose when she approached. "Horses are fine," he reported. "Roads will be muddy, but passable. We can reach the ranch in 3 more days." He sipped his coffee, his eyes scanning the room. The few miners there were watching her. "We'll leave as soon as possible," he said, his voice low. This isn't the sort of place I'd choose to linger. Some of these men, they've been watching you too closely for my liking." Hannah felt a chill. They ate quickly and left. As they rode away, Hannah felt Rusty's tension ease. "Not fond of mining towns," he said by way of explanation. "You seemed ready for trouble back there." "Always best to be prepared." He adjusted Thunder's saddle, avoiding her gaze. "Especially when traveling with a woman." The implication stung. "I'm sorry if I'm a burden." Rusty looked up sharply. "That's not what I meant. You're not a burden, Hannah." He hesitated, then added, so softly she almost missed it. "Just the opposite." Before she could ask what he meant, he mounted and urged his horse forward. The next 2 days passed. The landscape changed. Desert gave way to rolling hills, dotted with juniper and pine. On their final night before the ranch, they made camp near a small stream. "We'll reach the ranch by mid-afternoon tomorrow," Rusty said, "about 15 miles from here." Hannah felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. "What will you expect of me? At the ranch?" "Nothing you can't handle. Help with the horses. Some cooking, if you're willing. The rest, we'll figure out as we go." He studied her. "Second thoughts?" "No, just preparing myself." "It's not an easy life," he said. "The work is hard. The isolation. The nearest town, Clearwater, is a half-day's ride." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Hannah said, "and after recent events, some isolation might be welcome." A small smile crossed his features. "You're stronger than you look, Hannah Lockhart." "Thank you for believing that." They fell silent. "I should thank you," Hannah said suddenly. "Not just for Gila Bend, but for treating me as a person of value. It would have been easy for you, to..." "To what?" Rusty prompted. She met his gaze. "To take advantage. Many men would have." Rusty's expression hardened. "I'm not many men." "No," Hannah agreed softly. "You're not." Something shifted in the air. A tension that had nothing to do with discomfort. An awareness. Hannah held her breath as Rusty leaned forward slightly. The firelight cast shadows across his face. She thought he might. He stood abruptly, breaking the spell. "Dawn comes early," he said, his voice rough. "We should get some rest." Hannah nodded, unsure if she was relieved or disappointed. Sleep was long in coming. The next afternoon, they crested a small rise. Rusty pulled his horse to a stop. "Well, there it is." Hannah looked down, and her breath caught. A valley spread before them. A creek meandered through lush, green grass, bordered by cottonwood trees. Near the center stood a modest house of weathered wood, a stone chimney, a covered porch, a barn, a corral, and a small, neat cabin. "It's beautiful," Hannah said, and she meant it. Rusty's expression softened with pride. "It's not much, but it's home." As they rode closer, a figure emerged from the barn, an older man with stooped shoulders. "That's Hank," Rusty explained. "Helps around the place when I'm away." Hank approached, his curious gaze moving from Rusty to Hannah. "Wondered when you'd show up, boss. Storm slow you down?" "Some," Rusty agreed. "Hank, this is Miss Hannah Lockhart. She'll be staying in the small cabin, helping with the horses." If Hank found this unusual, he gave no sign. "Pleased to meet you, miss. Always said this place needed a woman's touch." He turned back to Rusty. "Got stew on the stove, if you're hungry." While the men tended the horses, Hannah walked to her new home. The cabin was small but sound. A fireplace, a narrow bed with fresh linens, a table, a window that looked out over the valley. It was perfect. A knock at the open door. Rusty. He placed her bag on the table. Is everything satisfactory? More than satisfactory. Thank you. Hank's meal is ready. There's a pump behind the cabin for water. He hesitated. Then he smiled. Welcome home, Hannah. The simple phrase. Home. It caught her off guard. Unexpected tears pricked her eyes. It had been less than 2 weeks since she'd lost the only home she'd ever known. Yet this small cabin, it already felt more welcoming. Thank you, she whispered. Rusty nodded once, then left her to settle in. Days turned into weeks. Hannah settled into a routine. The work was hard but satisfying. She cared for the horses, tended the small vegetable garden, cooked. Rusty was a fair employer. His expectations were high but reasonable. He was a man of few words but consistent actions. They fell into comfortable patterns. Breakfast and dinner shared at the main house. Days filled with their respective tasks. But beneath the growing companionship, an undercurrent remained. Hannah would sometimes catch Rusty watching her, an expression she couldn't quite decipher. But when she met his gaze, he'd look away. He maintained a careful, physical distance, always respectful, never familiar. One evening in early May, as they sat on the porch, Rusty broke the silence. I need to make a trip to Clearwater tomorrow, for supplies, and to check the mail. Thought you might like to come along. Hannah looked up from her mending, surprised. Both of us. What about the ranch? Hank's coming by. He can keep an eye on things. Rusty glanced at her. Unless you'd rather stay. No, I'd like to see Clearwater. The prospect filled her with unexpected excitement. Clearwater was a proper town, bustling. I need to visit the mercantile, the bank, and the post office, Rusty said. Should take a couple of hours. You're welcome to explore. Perhaps we could meet for lunch, Hannah suggested. Maggie's Cafe. Noon. Rusty nodded. Hannah explored, using her carefully hoarded wages to buy hair ribbons and a new book of poetry. At noon, she found Rusty at Maggie's Cafe, seated at a corner table, back to the wall. Successful morning? He asked, rising as she approached. Very. Got the supplies, he said. And the mail. He hesitated. Ran into some acquaintances, the Millers. They have a spread west of town. Good people. He looked uncomfortable. They've invited us to supper at their ranch this evening. Hannah raised her eyebrows. Us? I said I'd need to check with you. Me? Why would my opinion matter? Because, Rusty shifted in his seat. They seem to be under the impression that well, he trailed off. That we're, what, Rusty? He finally met her gaze. Courting. The word hung in the air. I see. Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks. And you didn't correct them? I tried, he said, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. Ellen Miller. She's the biggest gossip in 3 counties, once she gets an idea in her head. Look, we don't have to go. I can make excuses. Hannah considered. Their arrangement. It was bound to generate speculation. Declining might only fuel the gossip. I think we should go, she decided. Unless you'd rather not. The relief on Rusty's face was almost comical. All right then. We'll head out after we finish here. The Miller ranch was larger than Rusty's. Ellen Miller, a plump, energetic woman, greeted them with obvious delight. Rusty Weaver, as I live and breathe. When Thomas said he'd seen you in town with a young lady, I could hardly believe it. Her keen eyes assessed Hannah. And you must be Miss Lockhart. Rusty's told us absolutely nothing about you, which is just like him, keeping his happiness to himself. Before either could correct her, she ushered them inside. What followed was the most surreal evening of Hannah's life. The Millers and the two other couples they'd invited clearly believed she and Rusty were engaged in a serious courtship. Every attempt to correct this was either missed or deliberately ignored. "I've never seen him so attentive," Ellen declared, as Rusty refilled Hannah's water glass. "Love changes a man, doesn't it, Thomas?" "That it does, my dear," her husband nodded sagely. Hannah caught Rusty's eye. He looked mortified. But there was something else there, too. A vulnerability she hadn't seen. Despite the awkwardness, Hannah found herself enjoying it. These were good, welcoming people. As the evening drew to a close, Ellen pulled Hannah aside while the men discussed ranch matters on the porch. "I'm so glad Rusty found you," she said, patting Hannah's hand. "He's been alone too long. Not good for a man, especially one with his past." Hannah hesitated. "His past?" Ellen lowered her voice. "He hasn't told you about his sister." He mentioned she disappeared," Hannah said carefully. Ellen nodded, her expression turning solemn. "Terrible business. He hasn't told you the whole of it, I wager." "The whole of it?" "Rusty searched for months," Ellen said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's a determined man. He finally tracked her to well, a house of ill repute in San Antonio." Hannah felt the air leave her lungs. Madame Recitas. "But he was too late," Ellen continued, shaking her head sadly. "The poor girl. She had taken her own life just days before he arrived." Hannah felt sick. "Rusty blamed himself," Ellen said softly. "Blamed himself for not being faster, for not finding her sooner. He never—" Hannah couldn't speak. "He wouldn't," Ellen said. "He carries his burdens close, that one. But I see the change in him. Since you came, there's light in his eyes again." The ride home was quiet. The moon was high. It wasn't until they were nearly at the ranch that Rusty finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry about tonight. The assumptions. It must have been uncomfortable for you." "It wasn't so bad," Hannah replied, her voice distant. "They care about you. Ellen, she talks too much." "She told me about your sister," Hannah said quietly. "About what really happened." Rusty's posture stiffened. That wasn't her story to tell. "No," Hannah agreed gently. "It wasn't, but I'm glad I know." She turned in her saddle to look at him. "It helps me understand why you stopped that day in Gila Bend, why you paid $300, why you tore up that contract." Rusty stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion, an emotion he had held back for years. "I couldn't save Ella, but I could save you." The simple statement, so full of pain and determination. It broke Hannah's heart. Without thinking, she reached across the space between them. She placed her hand on his, where it rested on the saddle horn. "You did save me," she said softly. "In more ways than you know." Rusty looked down at their joined hands, then up to meet her gaze. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement, a truth that had been hiding just beneath the surface. Then thunder shifted, breaking the moment. Rusty straightened. He withdrew his hand from hers. "We should get back. It's late." As they parted at her cabin door, Rusty hesitated. He seemed on the verge of saying something. Instead, he just touched the brim of his hat. "Good night, Hannah." "Good night, Rusty." She watched him walk away, and she knew their relationship, employer and employee. It was over. Something new had begun. The following weeks, things changed. Nothing was said, not explicitly. But the careful distance Rusty had maintained, it began to diminish. Conversations lingered longer. Glances held more meaning. Hannah found herself looking forward to their shared meals, treasuring the quiet evenings on the porch. She began to see the man beneath the reserved exterior, the dry wit, the intelligence. She would catch him watching her, an intensity that made her pulse quicken. But he was still, hesitant, held back. The situation came to a head on a warm evening in late May. They'd spent the day repairing a fence together. Hard, physical labor. After supper, they sat on the porch. "I received a letter today," Rusty said abruptly. "From Fort Yuma, Captain Sullivan." "Oh," he mentioned, "Jeremiah Blackwell. He was found dead 3 weeks ago, apparently shot during an argument over a card game in Tucson." Hannah felt relief, and then guilt for feeling relief. "I see. Sullivan thought you should know." Rusty studied her. "Are you all right?" "Yes, I think so." She took a deep breath. "It doesn't change what happened, but perhaps it's one less thing to fear in this world." Rusty nodded. "The captain also wrote that your farm in Gila Bend has been sold. A new family moved in last month." This news, this struck her more deeply. The final severing. "I hope they're happy there," she said softly. "It was a good place once." "Do you miss it?" Rusty asked carefully. "Gila Bend?" "Parts of it, but no, I don't miss Gila Bend. And this place," Rusty gestured to the valley. "How do you feel about it?" Hannah sensed the weight behind the simple question. "I've come to love it here," she said honestly. "The valley, the work, the peace of it. Enough to stay?" His voice was low, almost hesitant. Hannah turned to face him. "Are you asking me something specific, Rusty?" He met her gaze. "I suppose I am." He took a deep breath. "These past months, with you here, they've been good, better than good. The ranch runs smoother, and I've been happier than I can remember being in a very long time." Hannah's heart quickened. "I've been happy too. Then, maybe we should consider making the arrangement more permanent." His hands, usually so steady, fidgeted with his hat. "A partnership of sorts." Hannah smiled. "A partnership. Is that what the Millers would call it?" A flush crept up Rusty's neck. "I'm not saying this well." He set his hat aside. "Hannah, I care for you, more than I expected to, more than I thought possible. And I hope, you might feel something similar." "I do," she whispered. "Care for you. Very much." Relief and joy. It crossed his features. "Then, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The proposal, she had sensed it was coming, but it still took her breath away. "Are you certain?" she asked. "It's a big step, from employer to husband." "I've never been more certain of anything," Rusty said firmly. "I know it hasn't been long, but I feel like I've known you much longer, like you belong here, with me." Tears pricked her eyes. "I feel that too. Is that a yes?" Hannah smiled through her tears. "Yes, Rusty Weaver, I would be honored to be your wife." He reached for her hands. "I don't have much to offer, beyond this ranch, and my promise to care for you. It's more than enough, more than I ever expected to find." His gaze dropped to her lips. "A question." Hannah answered by leaning forward. Their first kiss was tender. A promise. When they parted, he kept her hands in his, as if afraid she might vanish. I should ride to Clearwater tomorrow, speak with the preacher." "How soon?" "As soon as is proper." He took a small, worn gold band from his pocket. "My mother's ring. I was hoping." 3 weeks, Hannah suggested, her voice thick with emotion. To give us time. 3 weeks it is. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Are you sure? He asked, his voice full of wonder. About me. I'm not an easy man. Too quiet. I'm sure, Hannah said. Your quiet ways suit me. He smiled. A real, unguarded smile of pure happiness. He walked her to her cabin door. Good night, Hannah. Good night, Rusty. She watched him walk away. 4 months ago, her life was over. Sold. Now, she was engaged. To a good, honorable man. This was real. This was her second chance, and she was going to embrace it with her whole heart. The wedding was simple, held in Clearwater's small church. The Millers were there. Hank and his wife. Hannah wore the blue dress Mrs. Sullivan had given her. Wildflowers in her hair. Rusty, in a clean black suit, couldn't take his eyes off her. When he slipped his mother's ring onto her finger, Hannah felt a sense of rightness. This was where she belonged, with this man. The celebration was at the Millers' ranch. Laughter, music. As evening approached, Rusty found her on the porch. Ready to head home, Mrs. Weaver? The new name sent a thrill through her. Yes, I am. They rode back to their valley in the golden light of the setting sun. Welcome home, Rusty said as he helped her down. Hannah looked up at him. This man who had saved her. In every way a person could be saved. I am home, she replied. Wherever you are. He smiled and swept her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold. 1 year later. Hannah stood on the porch, a hand on her swelling abdomen, 6 months pregnant. She watched Rusty ride in, a small herd of new horses following. The sight of him still stirred her heart. The ranch had prospered. They had hired a young hand. They had added cattle. They had built onto the house. Life was good, hard, but good. How are my 2 favorite people today? Rusty asked, dismounting and giving her a kiss. We're well, Hannah laughed. Your son has been practicing his roping skills on my ribs all afternoon. Takes after his father, Rusty said with pride, placing his hand gently over hers. Strong and determined. They sat on the porch after supper. Their custom. I had a letter from Mrs. Jenkins today, Hannah mentioned. From Gila Bend. Oh, town gossip mostly. But she did mention the new family at our old farm. They planted fruit trees where my father's failed. Apparently they're thriving. That would please him, Rusty observed. Yes, it would. Hannah smiled. She also wrote that. After Blackwell's death, a new owner purchased his properties. He lowered interest rates. He's fair. The town is recovering. Good, Rusty said simply. Every town deserves better than a Blackwell. Hannah leaned against his shoulder. Do you ever think how different things might have been if you hadn't been in Gila Bend that day? Rusty was quiet. Sometimes, but what matters is what did happen. Still, it was chance, wasn't it? Rusty's arm tightened around her. Maybe, or maybe. My father used to say, some things are too important to be left to chance. Hannah smiled, thinking of the strange, winding path that had brought her here. From a dusty street in Gila Bend, sold for a debt, to this, a beloved wife, a soon-to-be mother. I like that idea, she said softly, that we were always heading toward each other, even when we didn't know it. Rusty pressed a kiss to her temple. His hand moved to rest protectively over their unborn child. Heading toward this, he agreed. Toward home. That contract in the Gila Bend dust hadn't been an ending. It was a beginning. The man who tore it up, who had paid a debt he didn't owe, now sat beside her. Her husband, her partner, her home. Some debts, Hannah reflected, are never truly repaid. They're transformed into love, into family, into a future neither of them could have imagined alone. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. And let me know in the comments, do you believe it was chance, or was it something more?